level. So I think it will be reasonable performance, particularly in terms of stream flow, but other things like soil moisture and ET as observed through flux towers and satellite observations, and we're comparing against those through the benchmarking as well. So there is fairly solid validation that is going on here according to the data that we do have as part of the benchmark reports that do come out. We want to expand that further through time, but focusing in the first instance just on those unimpaired catchments for the OR calibration, but broadening that out more widely over time. Okay.
Where does Fuse has got its own data structure? Source has got its own data structure. How do we handle these two data structure in your system?
Thanks, Narendra. Yeah, okay. The question was, Fuse has its data structures, Source has its data structures. How do you deal with them being different? Fuse can produce PyXML. There's some import filters for PyXML in the Aura wrapper that we send over to Source. So we interpret that PyXML, we turn it into commands that go on the Source command line, which runs step by step. So basically single values get passed over to the Source service, and it runs like that.
Dave, I think it was in your talk, you talked about, again, it might be my lack of technical knowledge, but a web interface through the command line for Source. Is that right? You talked about some sort of web-based interface. Is that right? Did I get that?
That's true.
Yeah.
Ben Layton published a paper on it late last year for ModSim. Right. So he developed, because we've got a WCF interface to Source, what he did was he did what's called a mashup. So he built a web page which would take data from USGS data service, so for America. It would then feed it into a Source river model, which would run on a server doing some river modelling. And then it would take the results and present that in a Google Graphs hydrograph. So you could see the inputs from the USGS going into a river model, coming out as another time series.
And all that through a web browser, is it effectively?
Yeah, all
okay.
that through a web browser.
Okay. I didn't know anyone was doing that, actually. I'm interested to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Right.
So it's one of those enabling technologies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
Hi, Shu-Ann Lovett from the River Restoration Centre. I'm interested in all the work you're doing. I'm just wondering, I'd like to hear a bit more about your users. So who are your key clients and how do you meet their needs in terms of what you're producing?
The key client is internal at the moment in terms of producing the reports, the National Water Account. And yeah, Grace is the head of the National Water Account section. And for the Aura reports, that's how we're serving it. We're not currently planning on pumping these things out on the web at the moment, but that may come down the track, I suspect, for wider use by all, the actual underlying products, that is. But first things first is get the things that we need to produce as part of legislation, which is the accounts and the Aura report.
Different for the different different users for the different types of reports. And so at the moment, the National Water Account has much more of a focus on people that are in sort of more Commonwealth level decision making about how we're managing our water resources at a national level. But it does connect with greater understanding of how we're sharing water resources at regions, so within, say, the Sydney region and things like that. So it has state-based users, but much more focused at the people that are interested in how we are operating water resources across the nation and comparability. The Australian Water Resource Assessment, it is, as a report, is much more focused on the water balance aspects rather than the management and allocations and entitlements. And so that can be a broader range of people that are interested in understanding the sort of year that was. And so it could be from people who are just wanting to know a general understanding of what was going on across the region. It could be people in natural resource management, much more locally, trying to get a feel for benchmarking whether it was a wet or a dry year and how their system was operating, so you actually understand a lot of what was going on in the region. So the country's divided into 13 reporting regions, and then there's particular point sources and information about trends over time, so you can understand if, say, the wetlands that are receiving inflows from the rivers was actually a really dry year, and it really was the driest year in the last 100 years. And so it has a lot of national context, but it's much more focused on trends and understanding particular points across the country and understanding how they fit in that longer term context.
Peter Bacon, another question that occurred to me was that this idea of scale, and Saran raised the issue of client. If you're dealing with individual community or something like that, and you're working off a 5-kilometre grid, you're working at a different scale to most people's thought processes, and indeed a lot of the modelling processes we're working with. I can understand why you've done it, but how do we sort of jump from one scale to another? How do you see that as happening, Andrew?
I guess it's about putting the right contextual information around the products that you're producing to explain it the right language for those users. But in the first instance, for our reporting purposes, it's over a much wider scale than local reporting per se, than I think you're talking about. So it's just about producing maps and that sort of thing that show general trends in certain areas in terms of oil reporting from, I think, where you're coming from. But for national water accounts purposes, it tends to be a wider, over large areas or whole urban systems like Melbourne or Canberra, that you actually report on the different sort of water balance terms, and you don't break down into that detail necessarily. So I think you just got to focus on the product that we are producing and think of the audience that we are producing it for. It's not necessarily for that individual at a particular location. That said, there are details where we do go down into that sort of level within the oil report. So it's just about providing the right contextual information about the methods we have used and the uncertainties involved in estimating them and trying to put that across to the various users.
Look, Grace, I just wanted to thank you and your colleagues from the Bureau for doing that today. Really appreciate that. Yeah, it's a deep and complicated bit of technology developments going on, I know, and it's highly complex. So great to get a coverage of it, and thanks for doing it for us today. And Rob, thank you. Rob, wherever he was, is here. Thank you as well. So thanks very much. Cheers, and thank you. So we are back here at 3:30 to hear a parallel story from CSIRO and Peter Warbrick and his colleagues. Cheers. Coffee and tea outside as well.